Welcome to Anecdotes for Success with Matt and Paul. Storytelling is an art form, emphasizing the value and learning that is created through personal experience. Our purpose is to share these stories and experiences with the listener. Everyone has a powerful testimony. Let's use them to level up to our best life with truth, meaning, trade-offs, and perspective.
Big shout out to Isaac Mather for the new podcast intro. You can check Isaac's music out on all socials or directly at isaacmathermusic.com. All right, we have Kierra Mags on today. This one's real special, Matt. Your daughter's friends with Kierra, so you knew who she was. So that doesn't help our normal format of surprising you. Although I didn't tell you till today.
No, you did, but I like I was saying before we started recording, I have a little bit of a, background and what Kierra's been up to, but I'm looking forward to learning much more, as I'm sure you are. So, we can get right into it. But yes, that's true. I have known Kierra for several years.
This is going to be a fun one. I taught at the high school Kierra was at, but transitioned to New Visions when you were there. Your year at New Visions, when she was in New Visions Health, it was my first year. So, and then you drifted off into the sunset, went away to college. I know all your sisters. I obviously have your younger sister in class now. And when she reached out and told me what she was up to, I was amazed. And before we get started, your journey is exactly how you thought it would be when you were 18 years old, right?
Yeah, no, it's changed, evolved, and yeah, my perception of what I thought I wanted has completely shifted. But I think it's part of the process, to be honest.
So tell everybody about you. You can go back as far as you want or start the story when you want, and just give us a little background before we get asking questions.
Okay, sounds good. So yeah, for everyone who's wondering, my name is Kierra, and I started off back in high school, like Mr. Richmond mentioned, back in New Visions Health. And I thought my dream job was going to be becoming a doctor, going to med school, the whole 9 yards. That's actually what I ended up going to college for. I majored in biology at Siena College. And after my freshman year, pretty quickly realized that medicine wasn't necessarily my passion. And I transitioned over to psychology and business as a major and minor. I really loved people. I loved relationship building, but I didn't necessarily know 100% what I wanted to do. So all throughout college, I had a bunch of internships, around like 11 internships in the capital region, and I just networked, started to just kind of get my foot in the door with business, learning I had a lot of marketing, PR related internships, some in like wedding planning and recruitment, which is funny because that's where I ended up having my first job post grad. But yeah, really quickly, I just learned kind of my mindset in college was I really just wanted to try out a lot of different fields in business to just understand like expertise and where I could align like my passion and like purpose with like potential careers post grad. So it's a really good experience. I loved Albany. And after that, I ended up accepting a job in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I was doing 360 recruiting. So it's a lot. It's basically like sales. As a recruiter, I was doing supply chain recruiting. So I would get a commission of, candidate salaries, and a lot of them would be like executive levels. So that was really great. But I was missing like the creative side of business. So I transitioned over after talking with my director. I transitioned over to a global marketing manager, where my company basically allowed me to choose if I wanted to either go to New York City or Dallas, Texas, just to that was where the biggest headquarters were for the marketing teams. And I decided to move to Dallas, Texas. So I had never even visited Dallas before, but I felt a calling and I felt like it was too good to be true. So I ended up moving over to Dallas. And then pretty shortly after that, I ended up interviewing for a globally remote job where I was able to work in marketing while still growing my career. And to me, I've always loved traveling. We're probably going to get into this, but I loved, like, it just sparked like studying abroad. And I feel like, I don't know, my end goal was to be able to travel the world while growing my career. And this opportunity arose and I just ran with it. So this year alone, I've been to 13 countries, and I have plans to continue traveling throughout the next year. And I really just want to start shining more light on this lifestyle, because I didn't even know some of these like opportunities existed even a year ago. So that's a quick watered down version
Great.
of my life.
No, that gives us a place to start, right, Paul?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, Kierra, when a couple things you mentioned throughout telling us about yourself that are important to what Paul and I talk about all the time is, you mentioned your purpose and your meaning throughout kind of your story. You also mentioned travel, which to me is perspective. Like one of the best things about travel, right? And I assume you'll agree, maybe you won't, but is it gives you a different perspective, right? It gives you a different way of viewing the world that you wouldn't have had if you didn't experience all the things you do in travel. And it's were those things that you were seeking a purpose, a perspective throughout kind of your growth? Let's even from high school, when I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to go do this, to where you've transitioned to and some of the things you've kind of changed doing over the years. Like, were those things on your mind, or is it just they've taken place?
So, yes, I've always had it in the back of my mind to try to find a career per se that allowed me to kind of combine everything that you're talking about. But I didn't even fully realize how much travel would be a core element of that until I would say when I studied abroad. To your point, I completely agree. I think traveling can be one of the world's greatest teachers. Like the lessons that you learn about yourself, about different countries, about different cultures, like those are things that necessarily can't be taught. Like you have to go there and experience it on your own. And I am so passionate about that because I would say, like, in terms of career wise, like some of the lessons I've learned this year have been more influential than lessons I learned, like, necessarily like in college or in person in a job. Like, some of these things you can't be taught. So I would say yes to like short version, absolutely. Like, these are things that I always knew deep down, but I didn't even like, I learned things about myself that I didn't even fully understand until this year, until I actually put myself in uncomfortable positions. I talked to Paul about this a little bit when I presented to high schoolers, but this is the first year I actually solo traveled to. So I think that also teaches you a lot about like yourself, confidence, life skills with like navigating different countries, language barriers. And I don't know, I just feel like I'm really passionate about like traveling in general. But yeah, I completely agree in terms of like the perspective you get.
Quick question, and I'm just asking it because we asked it in the classroom. How does that change your perspective when you come back into the States about our own country?
So I get this question a lot, and I think if anything, it makes me more appreciative of the United States in general as a country. I went to a lot of like underdeveloped communities, specifically in Central America, and I think like definitely gives you like a greater perspective on like okay, like how your upbringing affects you and influences you, and like your societal conditioning. I think I'm trying to think of what I mentioned to everyone as well. Like also, I know we talked about this as well, but like a major concern for like my friends and family when I was like, hey, I'm gonna go travel Central America, by myself, was safety concerns as well. And this is something that we talked about in the classroom. But I think also like in regards to safety in general, like as long as you're, I would say like putting like yourself out there and making sure you're doing your research, taking like proper safety protocols, I feel like in terms of what you would think certain locations would be aren't necessarily the reality, especially when it comes to like how the media portrays certain locations. So that's something else I learned as well. It's like you don't know what you don't know. And obviously you have to follow like research and do certain protocol things, but I don't know. At the end of the day, like sometimes you don't know what you don't know, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. I say that and think that all the time. You don't. I mean, it seems self-evident, but it's not. That so to be clear, the travel you're doing, you've been to 13 countries this year, you said, and that is not travel because of your work. That is your work provides you the freedom because it's work from home, whatever you want to call it, whatever we want to call it. You're traveling on your own because you have the freedom to do so because of the lifestyle that your job kind of provides you. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes, it is.
Gotcha. And I wanted to touch a little bit more. You said that it's kind of opened your eyes to um, our country and the United States, and how what nice things, opportunities maybe exist, or whatever. I don't want to put words in your mouth. Beyond maybe some safety things, and what else have you learned? Because I travel a lot as well, internationally, and I say all the time, when I get back from a trip, my last one, we were in Belgium and Luxembourg and London. I don't come back the same person. Mentally, I'm a different human, and that's why I love it so much. It's like I'm literally a different person than when I left, and I think that's a wonderful thing. Um, Hopefully, a better person, right? And I've had similar experiences where I've now think of our country in ways that I didn't quite the same because of visiting other wonderful places too. There's a lot of wonderful places, but do you see things in terms of education differently, business differently, just socially? I mean, all those things. Are there any things in those areas that you've kind of noticed that you come back and go, well, maybe in worse or different? Maybe some things you think are better elsewhere. Like, what are some of the things that have really hit home for you?
So I think the first thing, like off the bat, just from this year alone, with choosing to like travel full time while working full time, is I would say the community aspect of this lifestyle, which is a lot of people label it, by the way, a digital nomad. Exactly what you're talking about, like working anywhere in the world, taking your American income and going to different countries. And it's really interesting because this year alone, I feel like not only have I met other people from so many different countries, like Europeans, Australians, people from Central America, Colombians, that have the same lifestyle and are
Mm.
able to travel. And I can meet up with them in different countries, which is a completely different experience. But I feel like it's also like a nice sense of community because it's almost in a way coworkers. To put this in perspective, I would work in co-workings internationally. So there's certain chains, certain companies that make profit off of co-working, similar to like WeWorks in the United States. Like I know when I worked in Charlotte, North Carolina, I worked out of a WeWork, and it's so interesting because these co-workings abroad are very, very similar to like offices in the United States. So I think like off the bat, I would say one of the biggest like takeaways is this community that I didn't even know existed before this year. And now I'm like, wow, like there's so many networking opportunities as well while you're traveling full time because
Wow.
it's just really interesting. Like a lot of people do work in marketing, but a lot of people work in tech. I've met a lot of people who are like tech founders, like in terms of like startups doing their own like apps, a lot of app developments. And also, interestingly enough, I've met a lot of people who are into like real estate investing, who are just using that passive income to fund their traveling while they're doing like, so I think like a huge part of like that would be like the community. In terms of other lessons I've learned, I'm trying to think. I feel like culturally, every country I go to, I love just learning about like the cultures in terms of like the cuisine and like learning new recipes, like how like other people are brought up in terms of like their society conditioning. Trying to think of what else. I think also like in terms of like activities, because I'm able to travel full time, I've been able to do really unique, cool activities that I didn't even know existed. Like this year, I hiked an active volcano. It was an overnight hike. Saw like it from like a summit. It was 11 miles high. Probably would have never done that if I wasn't able to work remotely. I also slid down a volcano in Nicaragua. Didn't even know that was an activity prior to traveling. So I feel like these are all things that I'm just like learning. And because I'm like, again, just traveling and able to work remotely, I can do these really cool, unique adventures that I would not have been able to do if I was stationed somewhere in the United States.
When you talk about all those adventures, again, I heard you say this before, but I want to ask you the question. When do you get to do that? Because you're not in the same time zone. So how's your work schedule compared to your activities? What's the trade-off there?
Yeah. So in addition, I feel like a lot of people, when they think of traveling, they think of vacationing. And here's the thing about being a digital nomad. When you are a digital nomad, it is a lifestyle. It's not necessarily traveling. You're not on vacation. So that is one very common misconception that a lot of like friends and family think. You were working 40. I was working 40 hours a week while traveling the world. So for me, like these activities, I would have to fit in after my 9 to 5. So it depends on the country in a case by case basis. But in Central America, I would typically work like 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. and I could do activities after 3 p.m. or obviously the weekends as well. In Europe, I would typically work like 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. So it's kind of like an afternoon shift if you think about it that way. From like, you know what I mean? But it's like an opportunity cost of traveling to these places. But it definitely takes some adjusting too. And we talked about this as well, but I definitely had to learn like time management skills and ways to like get work done because you still have to produce, like you still have to show results and be productive in these conventional environments, which is a whole different challenge in itself. But yeah.
I think that's a great, go ahead, Paul. No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to follow up real quick with, are most of the people American or are they from all over? So if they're from all over, how difficult is it to find quiet space in these communities, or isn't it?
Okay, so there's a lot of options when it comes to office spaces and co-workings. You can obviously work in cafes if you're working anywhere in the world. You can rent. It depends on like the level that you want. There's like in terms of like Europe and also Central America with like Salinas, there's like it's called Offsite. These are companies that have like offices abroad. You can rent out your own office. You can rent out your own boardroom. So if you know yourself as a worker and you're like, I need absolute silence, I have a really important meeting, you can rent out your own office where it's like soundproof, your own space. But like I necessarily didn't really need that. I would have it'd be like an office, like a co-working in terms of like WeWorking, where it's like desks next to each other with other workers. And there's rooms inside those co-workings that you can go in that are soundproof as well. Like, you know, you need to take a meeting. I would use those sometimes. It's like almost like a telephone booth where you shut the door. It's interesting, but sometimes I would use those with like meetings if it was like really loud. But for the most part, I just got really, I would say like productive with like putting in my AirPods, putting on jazz music. And then I talked about this with like time blocking. If I get distracted really easily sometimes, and I would just block out like 30 minutes for like completing X task and putting on jazz music, and that helped me. Especially when like you're in some of these locations and like the beach is so tempting and like going like doing all these cool activities. And it's like, no, you need to concentrate, you need to get your work done before you can do all of these things. So yeah.
So there's a level of discipline there, and you, I think something you mentioned that's vital is productivity, right? You've got to produce. You know, I the only reason I point that out is I think it sounds wonderful. I think it sounds like especially for someone young who doesn't have some of the things that tie us down in life as we get a little older, whether it's family, whether it's children, whether it's a mortgage or whatever it might be, to have that opportunity. But it's also super important to point out the trade-offs, right? That's one of the other things that Paul and I talk about all the time is everything in life is a trade-off. There's no free rides. There's everything has a cost to it. And what would you say are the trade-offs you think you're making for someone who is, considering, hey, this sounds awesome. I'd love to put myself in a position to do what you're doing. What would you tell them the trade-offs are?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. In terms of the number one that I can think of right now in this lifestyle that we're talking about is the stability aspect. Because when you're traveling full time, working full time, the number one thing I would say that I'm like trading off is stability and structure. So, right now I necessarily don't have a home base. I'm going to Bali next, but in terms of like where, like that in itself sometimes is like for like your mental health and like roundness as a professional, like having those like structured aspects of your life, sometimes ground you. And I think that's a really big challenge when you're looking into potentially becoming a full-time traveler while working is, okay, like how do I make sure that all of these aspects are taken care of while I'm like on the go constantly? So that's number one. And in addition to that, I would also say with the structure part, the number one thing I probably missed the most was like my apartment gym when traveling, because like when you're on the go, like I don't know, I really like working out, and I would find ways to incorporate that into my daily routine. But it just looked different than my life when I was living in a big girl city with a big job, having my own apartment. It just looked very, very different. So, and yeah, I definitely think like there's advantages to both lifestyles that I've lived, But for me personally, like looking into my 20s, like I just wanted to know like this lifestyle was something I knew I really wanted deep down. And I just wanted to try it and see. I don't see myself doing this like living fully like a full-time traveler forever. But it was just something I knew I wanted to at least just try for the next couple of years in terms of like seeing the world while working. And if I could make it happen, I wanted to make it happen. But there definitely are opportunity costs to both. And I think you give up like that stability aspect, you give up that structure, which can be difficult.
Yeah, no, I of course there are, and I think it's honest to recognize those, right? There's, so
Mhm.
if your answer had been, well, there are no downsides, I'd be like, well, then I don't think you've thought it through clearly, because there's downsides to everything. There's nothing that doesn't have a trade off, and you clearly, experience them and are doing, we all have to take the good with the bad, right? There's nobody gets a free ride anywhere. But I was very curious what they might be, and of course it would depend on the human too, on what they value, right? And maybe there's some people who really value, living near their family, or some people who really value owning a home young and building, paying off that mortgage, and having that as part of the future. I'm just making things up on the fly here. Of course, I'm just saying there's trade-offs everywhere, and I'm glad you recognize that they exist, but trade-offs they're not equal either. You value this, it's meaningful to you. You're getting an opportunity to do something that I think is just fantastic and exciting, and something that has changed you and will impact you for the rest of your life in very positive ways. So don't misunderstand my question, meaning, oh, it's bad. I think it's wonderful. But I just like to point out to people all the time, there are trades in everything we do. And I was talking to a class, Paul, a week or two ago, and I said to them, I said, look, there's trades in everything we do. And if someone tells you they have a solution to something, or they have a great idea, and then you ask them, okay, well, what are the downsides or what are the trade-offs, and they don't have an answer, you need to run as far away from them as possible, because they haven't thought it through enough. They don't, if you can't name the trade-offs, then you're not being honest, in my opinion. But I wanted to follow that up, Kierra, with a question. You've used the term digital nomad a couple times. Is that your term, or is that like an industry term? Like, what? I've never heard it before.
Yeah, no, that's an industry term, and I hadn't heard of it either before, like looking for remote work. I think basically the term in general is just basically anyone that can work anywhere in the world with Wi-Fi. And I talked about this when I presented it to Paul's class, but I think when we look at the future of work, right, especially post COVID-19, there are so many remote working opportunities now that you can take an American income and work anywhere in the world with, and obviously it depends on a career and case by case basis, but in regards to like project based work, like you can produce, right? Like marketing specifically, there's a lot of marketing roles, but also like a lot of tech, IT, web design, like a lot of these roles you can really do anywhere in the world as long as you're producing results. And I think it's so interesting. And maybe this is my recruiter background coming out, but I think it's so interesting when you look at companies in terms of like some of their perks in regards to work from home or the future of work. Like I know there's companies now that are 4-day work weeks, which is really interesting. And there's studies shown how these 4-day work weeks are companies and clients, or I apologize, employees are still getting paid the same, but the results and the efficiency of these employees are still the same amount because they're happier. It's really interesting when you kind of look at it from that perspective, and it's something I'm really passionate about. And also, I think that there's companies now that are like 5-day work weeks, but they're only like 5 hours long. So it's like a different, like same kind of concept in terms of like employee appreciation, but looking at it in terms of maybe getting a little creative with how can we best show employee appreciation while still having the same results. So really interesting.
Very.
Yeah. So you work for a company. Are you scared, or does it ever cross your mind, what if you didn't work for that company? Are there other digital nomad jobs you think you could acquire now just because the network you've built, or would that be an automatic signal to come back to the States?
So that's a really good question. And it's something I'm really passionate about because I'm actually starting my own business on the side currently for social media management. I think in general, my time, like I would be scared. Yes. Like it is scary to not have a job at any capacity. Right. But I think my perspective has completely shifted from where I was a year ago till now because of the people I've met and like the creative roles I've seen. Like careers I didn't even know necessarily existed from, yes, like other companies. Like I've met and networked with a lot of companies worldwide, but also just like creative careers. Like I talked a little bit about this, but the creative economy right now, there are jobs that don't even exist for people that are about to graduate in college, or I don't know, I feel like there's so many roles, right, in terms of ways to make money that aren't necessarily climbing the corporate ladder. And that is something that I'm very, very passionate about because I think that's something I wish I knew when I was in high school or even throughout college is some of the careers and opportunities that you can make six figures doing side hustles with X, Y, and Z, whether that's like user generated content for brands, that's a marketing term, or Amazon, drop shipping. Like there's a lot of different ways to get creative about success and finding those like ways to make money. So yes and no. I think my end goal is to work for myself while traveling instead of working for an employer. And I think that this year has kind of taught me that you can absolutely take your 9 to 5 abroad, but the type of people that I like aspire to have their lifestyle are ultimately entrepreneurs. So I feel like this is just like the start and like a spark of something that I'm just like ready to fully dive in. But yeah, I think that I'm really passionate about traveling and I want to make it a reality as fast, like to the best of my ability.
So Kierra, so much of what you said there, I couldn't agree more with. If you want to have that type of lifestyle, there's really only one direction. It's being an entrepreneur, being a business owner. Tell us, what does your business, the business you aspire to produce and make valuable so that people will be interested in paying you for it so you can live the lifestyle. What's that look like? What are you trying to do?
So I think in terms of like business, I would love to become a social media manager for a lot of different brands. If there's one career that I've met with people that I've networked with, it's been social media managers. And I think one, just on the creative side of things, there's a lot of room for growth when you look at like niching down on, because at the end of the day, social media is the future. I really do believe that. For brands to have a digital presence is really important for their sales, their marketing, retained customers. So I think my end goal would be to start my own social media management agency. Right now, I already have 2 customers. I'm looking to get 5 before I go all in Bali. But I think in regards to just social media in general, it's just really important. It's something I'm really passionate about. And then on the side, I think I could also see myself helping other aspiring digital nomads obtain this type of lifestyle as a recruiter. So maybe like using my background in recruitment to make this more of a reality for more people. So.
Yeah, I would think that opportunity would certainly exist for you. I mean, it's unique, and you said use the word niche for something else, but it applies here as well. I mean, that is, I think, a real opportunity. Like, if I'm going to do what you're doing, the life you're living, boy, I got a lot of questions, right? Boy, I've got a lot of concerns. Boy, my parents do, whoever, the people who care about me do, to be able to help people work through those challenges and really provide comfort and guidance, I would think would have some real value to it. So I could certainly see that as being a real interesting opportunity. And, the way I see it, the more you talk about a creative lifestyle and creative careers more of what I'm talking about, as AI and we continues to evolve, and some of those jobs and careers that are very standardized, let's say it's law. Here's what the law is, right? Like or HR, here's what the policies are. Like, I think a lot of those jobs are going to get gobbled up with AI. I think we're going to have a major change in how a lot of industries perform if you're in some of those areas. But if you're in the creative space and you're social media and you're traveling and you're providing advice and content, some of those kinds of things, I think you got a real leg up in terms of the possibilities now more than ever, because I think some of those other I think some of those other careers are dangerous to be in, to be perfectly honest with you. Not dangerous physically, but dangerous in terms of where those might be headed. So I think you're kind of positioned in some unique areas that provide a tremendous amount of upside and possibilities. And you've clearly succeeded, as far as I can tell, in doing what you're doing. And people want someone who they can look to and rely on for that kind of guidance and help, and especially in an area like this where you're traveling. I think you got some real interesting opportunities there.
Yeah, and to go off of what you said a little bit, I think it's really interesting that point you mentioned with like a lot of traditional careers. I completely agree. I think AI can replace a lot of careers, and that can be scary. So if you're not changing with society, like you could be in danger of losing your job. But this just reminded me of a story that I had, because this happens, I feel like, a decent amount when you're working remotely. I was working in a cafe in Lisbon, Portugal. It was beautiful, overlooking Lisbon. And I was sitting next to these two other remote workers and just started having a small conversation. Well, it turns out they were also from the United States, traveling fully remotely. And his wife was expecting a baby. It was a couple that was married, but they were just traveling full time. It turns out he was actually a lawyer, but similar to what you were mentioning, he was getting his PhD or doctorate, something along those lines, and he was writing an ebook to kind of showing like how you can have this lifestyle in terms of being a traveling corporate lawyer, which I just thought was so interesting, because when you think of going to law school, becoming a lawyer, you don't think of being able to do this on the go and working remotely and X, Y, and Z. So it kind of reminded me of that story, because I feel like, again, through traveling, I'm able to like have these conversations, talk to people, like see how people are achieving this lifestyle. If it's not necessarily like you're in an office every single day, working in a cubicle, etc. So just really interesting.
Very interesting.
When you reached out and said you were going to be in town for a while to come into the classroom, I couldn't say yes fast enough, because when you left, students are like, how come more people don't do what Kierra does? And I'm like, well, I mean, if you're settled and older, there's probably a higher barrier to entry just because of things you'd have to take care of. Not that you couldn't do it. If you're younger, you don't know about it, right? And that brings me to my question. When you're back in town, do friends, family, people you talk to, do they really understand what you do, or do they make comments that you're so lucky? Like, I mean, because it's a lot of work, but it's a lifestyle, like you said. So I guess answer that any way you want, but they must comment. People always comment. That's why I wanted to ask it.
I'm laughing because this actually just got brought up at dinner the other night. My sisters told me they have no idea what I do still to this day. So to answer your question, yes, everyone has a lot of questions still. They understand I work online and that I work in marketing, but they don't fully understand, I think, what social media managers do and all the logistics that go into my day to day of like actually working a 9 to 5 internationally sometimes. But I think it also brings another point to whether you study abroad or you travel. A lot of the experiences that you get when you're outside the country, I don't think you can even sometimes conceptualize like how you've changed as an individual to people back home sometimes. And that's something I still struggle with sometimes, with how do I convey like, okay, I've grown from this experience to either my friends or family back home, and like why I am the way I am, or why I'm potentially more patient, or I have a different perspective on X, Y, and Z. So yeah, that is something that people definitely question me on, and I'm still learning on like how do I explain like, hey, I'm actually working and I promise you I have a job. um, yeah, it's just funny. But also I think too, like we talked about with traveling, a lot of people think of it as vacation. Here's the thing too, if you can take an American salary and work in other countries, I actually saved money this year. It's actually crazy. Like if you think about it, rent where I was living in Dallas, Texas versus Charlotte, North Carolina, those are really big cities with pretty expensive rent, especially right now. And I have a lot of friends who are in New York City. Like it's just rent all around is crazy, right? If you can take that and use that, obviously I had to pay for accommodation, save money, you can have money for adventures, you can have money to invest further. Like when you start thinking about it creatively, it's kind of crazy like how much money you can actually save too while living this lifestyle. So that's another thing I would say, like not like a lot of people fully understand the logistics of the finances, but when you think about it creatively and you're staying at like co-livings or or places like Airbnbs. Like it's crazy how much money you can actually save too. So
You've said it a couple times, and I made note of it. You said American salary. You've said it, I think, 3 times by my count. And I was going to mention it. I think what you mean, or what you're saying, is our dollar goes a lot farther in some countries than it does in our country, and therefore you get more for your money, right? I mean, that's essentially what you're saying, and by being intelligent about how you spend the money as well, and some of those kinds of things. But it's giving you an opportunity to experience more and use those dollars for more value than you would have gotten, spending $3,200 a month on an apartment in Dallas, or whatever it happens to be. You can take that 3,200, maybe it costs you 1,200 in American dollars for accommodations for a month in Portugal, and then that other 2,000 is there for increased experiences or adventures. I just think I'm glad you mentioned it, because I think it's important for people to recognize that it's not a dollar for dollar exchange necessarily. You can do more with the same amount in this particular instance, and put money away on top of it. It sounds like.
Yeah, it's just crazy because I don't think a lot of people realize that sometimes, especially when you think of like.
I think people probably look at it and think it would be more expensive, right? Because people look at it as vacation, right?
Vacation.
And what's one of the biggest expenses people have in their lives each year? Vacation. So they're probably, I could see why people would think that, and I'm glad you pointed out that's not exactly how it works, because otherwise they might be missing a piece of the equation and wouldn't add up to it.
Yeah, definitely.
Kierra,
It's definitely a different.
Yeah.
Oh no, go ahead and finish. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just gonna say that it's just a different way of thinking, and I think it definitely kind of goes against like the status quo sometimes with what you think of success and like what I envisioned my life. That's why when you ask like, is this what you thought you were going to be doing? No, I had no idea I was going to be living this type of crazy lifestyle. But I think I wouldn't have it any other way. Like I'm really thankful for the experiences I've had. I'm excited to go to Asia and explore more, and I think it's just all about like thinking creatively and outside the box sometimes.
I've been thinking about this a lot since you came in, and I feel like the average, American, because I live here, is worried. They're on a hamster wheel, and they're worried about building a bigger hamster wheel and then getting a bigger cage and building a bigger hamster wheel, and that's their life. When you just said, heck with it, I'm just going to run wild in the fields and I don't need any of that stuff. And it frees up a lot of your money to go live that lifestyle. It blows my mind that more people don't think about it, but it also goes back to the fact, if you don't know, you don't know.
Yes. I love that quote. I live by that quote.
So I want to go back to your college years. You were all set to have a career in health. You went to a year of college thinking that. So what clicked between, specifically, why'd you make the jump after your freshman year?
That's a good question. I think first off, I didn't fully understand everything in terms of biology, chemistry. I remember taking chemistry and being like, I was so burnt out by the work. Like it just wasn't clicking. Like science never came natural to me. I think writing, like science and math necessarily, like, in terms of like the core logistics of like what goes into like med school, being a doctor, like I could have done it, but I just wasn't fully passionate about it. And I just remember my first semester at Siena, I liked the idea of becoming a doctor and the people, but when I looked into like, okay, what do I actually like about this career? It was more the aspect of like helping people, the aspect of like talking and relationship building, which I realized you can do that in business. Like that is transferable to business. You don't have to be a doctor and go to, and also to that point, I think I realized pretty early on, maybe this is like the entrepreneur in me, but med school in terms of fellowship, residency, like there is a lot of financial debt and like schooling that goes into this. And I was like, okay, if I'm not 100% certain that this is my calling, like I just wanted to explore other options. So that's why I switched over to business. I started to look into internships in the Albany area and just relationship build in business. And I realized, okay, look, like I could still do what I liked, which was the people side of business in business and not have to go to medical school, not have to become a doctor to be successful. I think also that was another misconception I had. When I was back in health or just like in general, I thought, okay, what is like the absolutely most successful I can be? I thought doctor, lawyer. Like, I don't know why. Maybe that's just like very traditional of me. But I was like, this is what I want to do. This is like my version of success in terms of like hitting these milestones to be successful. And I think in college that changed because I realized like there are so many ways to be quote unquote successful. You don't have to become a doctor. You don't have to become a lawyer. Like you can make an impact so many ways. So I would say like that was probably the biggest thing, but mostly I just was not that passionate about biology and chemistry, like the actual nitty gritty, like science equations. And also, this should have been a red flag in New Visions, but blood, I'm not the greatest with blood either.
Yeah. I have a similar story when we went on a field trip when I was a little kid. I'm like, nope, that's not for me. Next question that piggybacks back to the college years. I hear a lot of flack on social media, especially on Twitter, where I spend a lot of time, where everybody's like, you don't have to go to school, just find a mentor, build your business, and go. And I think college is super important. I understand the debt aspect, and we could have a whole nother conversation on how you go to school and try to limit the debt. We all understand that. But I think you said something that makes college completely worth it. Well, first of all, you thought of you had the opportunity to change your career path, but you keep saying things. I network, I did tons of internships, and I built relationships. And what better place to do that than at college when you're really in a safe setting, right? 3 meals, a place to live, and you had the opportunity to meet all these people. And it looks like you took full advantage of that.
Yeah. One of my favorite motivational quotes, I'm not sure if either of you have heard of Mel Robbins, but she talks a lot about college
Yeah.
and the experience you get in college. And yeah, one of her quotes is about college and the experience and the education that you get in college. And basically, the quote that I love is in regards to basically how college is not always about grades and like the numbers game of like your GPA. It's about the experiences of what you make of college. It's about the people you meet. It's about learning about yourself professionally, personally, learning about yourself in a new environment outside of your hometown. It's funny because it kind of goes 360 of some of these reasons why I love traveling so much is because these are same concepts, life concepts that are being applied in the real world. So I think, yeah, I absolutely took full advantage of networking. I took full advantage of the capital region of a new city outside of Elmira. And then obviously that translated into traveling abroad. But I'm so passionate about that because I think you really do learn so much about yourself in terms of like the world that you grew up in versus, Albany or these experiences. So yeah, I think that I couldn't agree more in terms of college is so beneficial and it has so much value aside from just the paper degree. So
Yeah, but to go to a place and just rack up debt and change your major 4 times and let's say not meet anybody and just party, you're not gonna get the same advantage, right? You might as well just go find a mentor. And I'm not saying you can't have fun, but it sounds like you took full advantage of the relationship building, and that's what I just wanted to bring up. So that's awesome. And about Mel Robbins, I use her in the wintertime because she does that 5 4 3 2 1 get out of bed. Have you ever seen that? I
I
used
think
to be
so.
a yeah, I used to be a snoozer. So when my alarm goes off, she says you just go 5 4 3 2 1 and get up, and that's helped me tremendously. So I use her for different reasons, but she's great. She's great.
I love that.
Kierra, let me ask you this. This is something that sounds like you obviously enjoy it, but you're probably not going to do it for the rest of your life. Do you have a time at X age I'm done with it, or X number of experiences or places I've been? I've seen now X amount of countries, like, or you're just going, hey, I'm doing this on feel.
So my original plan was 2 years of full-time travel, and then I wanted to invest in real estate in the United States, really get that like up and running so I could have that passive income to continue traveling with. I think that it's open for negotiation depending on my experiences in Asia. But that's part of the reason why I mentioned this to Paul's class. But I was actually going to go straight from Europe to Asia, but I wanted to come back to New York to really start entrepreneurship and start taking that seriously because there's nothing wrong with this. But I think that sometimes when you look at a 9 to 5, even that in itself can be a form of stability. I know that sounds like very entrepreneurship, but I think in terms of like being able to really like have the life I wanted, like it's going to take, like we talked about this, like entrepreneurs, you were working significantly more than, especially starting out, to get a business up and running, to get the systems in place, significantly more than the average 9-to-5 worker. And I recognized that, especially in Central America and Europe. And I was like, I wanted to really just like come home, see family, but also take this seriously in terms of getting up and running off the ground, like getting systems in place, getting the clients I wanted to be able to go to Asia when it was like earned. So yeah, if that answers your question, I feel like yeah, overall, like it's just, I knew I needed to like really sit down, grind, put in the work, and just make it a reality, because I do have big dreams and I do think I want to keep traveling the world, but I also recognize like entrepreneurship is a long game. Like it's very, very long game. That's something I'm learning more and more, especially through all these like courses I'm taking, podcasts I'm listening to. Like, to make this actually a reality, it's going to take work. It's going to take more than just talking the talk of being a full-time digital nomad. So that was part of my decision too. But yeah, I don't see myself doing it forever. I think I've met people who've done it forever. I talked about this with Paul's class a little bit too. I've met people who travel the world with their kids. I've met expats in a lot in Lisbon, Portugal. I met a lot in Belize. That's a big market right now for expats from the United States. I love traveling. I think it's always gonna be a part of my life. I don't think I will like move abroad internationally, but I also don't know. I don't know yet.
Yeah, interesting. I feel like
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, I feel like you've got a very adult perspective on what it's gonna take to go to pursue this, and you know, you talk about the entrepreneurial route and the amount of work that goes into it, and believe me, I'm well aware, and
Yeah.
and but the upside of it, and the lifestyle it can provide for you and your family or whoever you want, it only exists in entrepreneurship. It does not exist with a job. It's not there. I mean, I say this to people all the time, and sometimes I think like people think I'm joking. Like, no, it's the only way to do it. But it takes a tremendous amount of upfront work and sacrifice, and and all those things. And you know, I think far too often people are misled that being an entrepreneur is inventing the next Uber or the next Facebook or the next, you know, whatever. And the fact of the matter is, that's, do those things happen? Sure, but you know, people win the lottery too, and I would, that wouldn't be my plan. You know, I think the plan is, like, you're talking real estate, and it's long term, and it's long term thinking, and those kinds of things. I just feel like you have your, I think your understanding is there to be able to do the things necessary to kind of have the kind of lifestyle that you want to have. And I'm just, it's not a question, it's just a statement saying I'm impressed by that, and that you clearly have given it a lot of thought and understand what goes into it. Not, hey, I'm just going to start my own business and the money's going to roll in and I'm just going to do what I want. And I hope that happens, but actually, no, I don't. I hope it doesn't happen. I don't think that's good for someone. I hope what's happened is you work really hard and you make a lot of mistakes and you fail and you get up and you keep going forward and you learn and you learn and you learn and never stop. And I know beyond a doubt that you'll have exactly what you want to have. You might not have it as soon as you want to have it, but you'll have it. And that's normally the story. And I'm too oftentimes when the story is, yeah, I just nailed it day one. I don't think the result, I don't think the end is what people desire when that happens. I think you need the struggle and you need the hard work and you need the sacrifice. You need all those things to truly appreciate it and have the perspective that's necessary to have it long term. But you're definitely heading that direction as far as I can tell.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. I think I want it to be earned too, to that point. I think some of like just because I'm very passionate about entrepreneurship, I fully like immerse myself whenever I would go on walks, or I love podcasts in terms of like listening to like entrepreneur stories. I love Girl Boss Radio, like all these like self-help, I don't know, platforms and mediums. But I think when you start immersing yourself in those like talks, lectures, whatever it may be, you start thinking differently too, which is really important. Like this podcast, I absolutely love it because you're having these types of conversations that are important to set people up for success, to think differently, to think outside the box. And that's something I'm really passionate about. If you can't tell by the Nomad lifestyle.
No, I'm so glad you said it because it can't be overstated that the way to success, and however anyone defines it, is up here. It's in how you think, and it means putting yourself in positions through talking to people, conversations, travel, meeting people, more reading over and over again. It will change the way you look at things, the way you look at the world, the way you think of yourself, the way you think of your future, and that's what's going to get you there. And I'm so glad you said it because it's not said enough. It's not stated enough. There's far too much talk about luck or if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. I don't believe in any of those things. I believe there is luck. Don't get me wrong. And I believe the meant to be is when you convince yourself it's what you're going to do and where you're going to go. And that comes from all the things you're referring to. So I'm glad you said it because if I could offer anyone one piece of advice, and I get people ask me advice all the time, I'm like, you will get where you want to go when you convince yourself up here you're going to do it. But you can't lie to yourself. You have to convince yourself through these mediums you're talking about: podcast, reading, conversation, action, all those things. So again, it's not a quite. I'm just thrilled that you said it because that is the way there.
As we wrap up, Kierra, what, 6 years ago you were a senior in high school, right? 6, right? And think this is what I like always telling people. I like to go in 5-year blocks. If you keep working hard, not afraid of failure, you're moving on, you're taking exits and trying new things, you don't even recognize yourself. And that's just a span of 6 years. Imagine 12 years, 15 years, 20 years. So there's no doubt in my mind, you'll look back 6 years from now at this podcast and say, I can't believe I spent time with these two knuckleheads. Like, I'm too big for this now. I'm saying, I hope you come back and visit. I'm going to put you on the spot with a question. If you had to live in the United States today, do you have a favorite spot, or is that just too hard to answer right now?
I have two favorite spots. California, 100%. I love like Malibu, the beach. I'm a beach. I love like all those locations I went to, especially like during the winter time, was tropical. I love California. Actually, 3 locations, but this is where I'm looking to live after I travel. California, specifically like Malibu or potentially like Huntington Beach. Florida, I love like Fort Lauderdale. And then I love Hawaii. I love like Hawaii is genuinely such a beautiful location. The people are amazing. My uncle's from Hawaii. My only thing about Hawaii though is it just because of how much I love to travel, it is a little far from other locations. And you're kind of stuck to that one airport versus like California, LA is a great, like LAX is a great airport. Miami is a big international hub airport. So you can find like a lot of great deals from those airports. So that's my only thing about Hawaii, but I love all 3 of those locations in the United States.
Great answers. Paul, I got to follow up now because that was a great, I can't believe we didn't get into some of that more with your experience. Now, same question, different twist. If you had to live somewhere abroad, where would it be? And if you were to recommend to someone who to travel somewhere abroad as a vacation, as a go see this, for a week or whatever, what would that? So it's 2 questions. You have to live somewhere and you have to tell someone where to visit.
Oh, this is such a hard question because I love so many different places.
Yeah.
I guess it also depends on what you're looking for in a vacation, but I'll just say my answer off the bat. Okay. So my number 1 location I would recommend to somebody if they're looking to travel and get outside their comfort zone for like all like cultural experience, Morocco. Tangier, Morocco pleasantly surprised me. The people were so sweet. It's very cost effective. It's just naturally pristine and beautiful. So I would say Morocco.
Great.
And then for living abroad, oh, it's so hard.
And by the way, I'm going to interrupt you real quick. My wife and I, and Lauren, she was there with us. We were in Lisbon and Spain and Portugal. And originally we were going to go to Morocco. Because it's close. You know, we could have gone there, and I don't remember why, because it's been a few years. We didn't go there, and just last night we were watching a show, and it had a map, and Morocco was on there. My wife and I said, "I can't believe we never went to Morocco," and now you're making me regret it even more. So anyway, I will have to go. Now I definitely have to go after you said that. So I interrupted, but I had to mention that. So where would you live?
Where would I live? That is hard, but I think I would probably have to say somewhere in Europe, just because it's pretty similar with like the infrastructure, healthcare, cuisine, etc. I would say Marbella, Spain, like somewhere coastal in Spain. I loved Lisbon. I think it all just depends on like the type of like city, or if you're like suburban. I personally like love Spain because I think like you could get the countryside, but you could also get like really big cities like Marbella. You can get to Ibiza and Majorca, which are islands in Spain, which are also beautiful. But yeah, I feel like you can't go wrong in a lot of places in Europe. But I just personally loved like the Spanish food, Spanish lifestyle. I love the Spanish siesta, which is like taking an hour off during the day.
Well, we ate so late when we were there. We were eating dinner at like 10 o'clock at night. I was like, holy cow, this is crazy. It's a whole different thing. But yeah, what a beautiful country. Although I have not been there specifically where you're mentioning, but I could see why Spain would be on your radar. So
yeah, I just love the beaches. But yes, they do eat really, really late there. It's different. And it's like a lot. I'm sure you can. I notice this about myself a lot traveling, like especially being a New Yorker. Sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, I am like impatient when it comes to like getting food and like restaurants. And then you really learn patience.
Let's go. Yeah, right. They're just no. Yeah, I know. And again, those are some of the wonderful things that you learn about yourself, and why it's so cool that you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah, it's definitely been a learning experience, but yeah, all those places are beautiful. So
cool. Well, thanks for answering.
Matt, we called her out. We called her out in class. We didn't, when she showed a lot of pictures of places she's been, and I didn't see any snow, and I didn't see anything really north. And I think she was just reiterating that that's not going to happen.
I can understand that.
Kierra, as we close up, where can people find you on social media if they maybe want to be a client? You're busting out this new company. Where can we find you?
Yeah, if anyone's interested in social media management, definitely add me on LinkedIn at Kierra Megs. And if you're looking for Instagram as well, same thing, my first and last name, Kierra Megs. So
great. This has been a great conversation. I wish you the best. You don't need luck because you have hard work and perspective, and you understand trade-offs. So I mean, you're a poster woman for this podcast, really. So thank you. We appreciate your time, and make sure you touch base when you're out on your travels.
I will. And thank you both so much. I am a huge fan of all the messaging you're pushing out in terms of like antidotes for success. And yeah, it's been really great. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kierra.
All right. I'll talk to you guys later.
Yeah, bye.